we are basically destroying the brains of our children. Why do we have so much ADHD and autism, children unable to graduate from high school? The problem is their brains are so damaged.
Dr. Pizzorno, I personally call you the father of natural medicine.
I've been involved in medicine now for over half a century. The reality is that we have a really sick society.
Are there foods that you think we should just absolutely stay away from?
That's a long conversation.
I have a few products here, for example, these sunblocks. Is it more harm than good?
Let me quote Dr. Michael Hollick. For every death we save from skin cancer, we cause 55 cases of breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, and lung cancer.
I do believe that people are finally waking up.
Each person is their own best doctor. Stop buying into the sick system and commit oneself to the healthy system.
Dr. Pizzorno, I hope that this is going to be one of the only medical interviews that I'm doing that actually doesn't get censored, because every time I've brought on a doctor who's willing to speak the truth, for some reason, social media has given us a lot of grief. So hopefully this is going to be the one that actually gets to go viral without censorship. I personally call you the father of natural medicine. I know that you're going to correct me, and I know that there are people who've done this before.
Yes.
But I think this is an incredible moment for you and for people who have learned from you and followed you, because I do believe that people are finally waking up. I do remember times where I would go into the doctor, whatever doctor it is, and I would ask questions about natural medicine, homeopathy, functional medicine, and I would get the look. And you know what that look is. Are you crazy? Why are you, going down these rabbit holes, you weirdo? But times are changing. I think people are looking for more autonomy and sovereignty and a better understanding of what we're putting in our bodies and why there are so many issues, so many medical issues. And so you have been at the forefront of this. You started Bastyr University.
Yes.
You have written the Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine. You've written many books about toxins. And so I just think this is your moment. It's your moment.
Well, thank you. I think it is a great opportunity. I've been involved in medicine now for over half a century. So I've had a chance to read a lot of research, see a lot of patients, and watch how things change over time. And one of my greatest concerns right now is we now suffer the highest burden of chronic disease in every age group ever in human history. Why? What's happened? What's happened is people ignored what my teachers were saying 100 years ago. 100 years ago, they said, if you treat the symptoms of disease with drugs that turn off the symptoms of the body not working properly, you get more chronic disease. They were laughed at. But now we know it's true. This whole idea is about avoiding toxins, eating healthfully, getting exercise and such. Naturopathic doctors, of which I'm the more recent version of, we've been teaching this and practicing this for over 100 years. And it's wonderful to see now the Maha movement and such adopting these ideas that we work so hard to keep alive in the culture despite huge opposition from conventional medicine. So yes, this is our time. We've been doing this for a long time. I've written, 12 books now. The opportunity is now for people to be healthy. It's time to stop buying into the sick system and commit oneself to the healthy system.
Yeah, so many of us have been saying the same thing, that we feel like we have sick care in America, not actual health care in America.
Yes.
And so much of it has to do with the way we're treating our bodies.
Yes.
Can you explain to us briefly, what is the difference really between natural medicine, naturopathy, and conventional medicine?
Yes. If you look at medicine, and this has been going on for hundreds of years, there's kind of two schools of thought. One school of thought says the body makes mistakes, it's the victim of the environment, and the role of the doctor is to take control and fix things. It has its place, like infections, things like that. But then there's the other approach. The other approach says the body has tremendous ability to heal if we just give it a chance. So how do we give the body a chance to heal? Well, we naturopathic doctors say, first, remove what's blocking the healing. Well, what's blocking the healing? Nutritional deficiencies, environmental toxins, poor lifestyles. So first thing we do is we make the body stronger by removing what's blocking the healing and using nutrients and such to help support the strength of the body. So while we both have patients come to see us with disease, one just turns off the symptoms of the body breaking. The other one says, those symptoms are telling us there's something wrong. Let's focus on why those symptoms exist and deal with the cause of why they exist. So one system It's popular because it's fast.
Mhm.
You have arthritis, something's inflamed. Take ibuprofen. Within a few hours, it feels better.
Yeah.
It's not better. It just feels better. Whereas I would say, oh, you have arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, for example, big problem in women. I say, well, let's measure your body load of PCBs. What you say, why that? Well, these polychlorinated biphenyls, they account for about 20% of rheumatoid arthritis in women because of the damage they do to the system. So we do things like that. We dive in. Why is it happening? Can we fix it? Now, sometimes things have progressed to the point where you can't fix it and you need help. Well, fine. Now use that system. But what's happening now is for everything, we're using this system that's primarily turn off symptoms. Go on the internet and just do this little search. Search for the 10 most commonly prescribed drugs on the internet. Just search for that. 9 of the 10 only relieve symptoms. They don't deal with the cause of disease. So why is it a surprise that we're getting so much chronic disease? Because we're not dealing with the causes.
I think for consumers like me, it's hard to understand why can't we have both? Like,
Yes.
why can't we have a doctor who is looking at both, is both looking at the underlying problem and trying to help the body
Yes.
do what it's supposed to do. And when it comes to a point where you actually need Western medicine intervention, maybe it's
Yes.
something acute, then you can have both. And it appears to me like there is this bizarre gap and separation between the conventional medicine doctors and the natural doctors. And,
Yes.
and why is that?
I think there have been many different reasons over the years. But let's be honest about it. The labor union for medical doctors, we call the AMA, has actually suppressed natural medicine everywhere possible. When, for example, I as a naturopathic doctor, I want to get licensed, to have a state start licensing us, virtually always the AMA will have somebody there opposing it. This opposition to our medicine has been severe. Some of my teachers, for example, were taken away in handcuffs in front of their patients for daring to recommend to their patients use vitamins and minerals and herbs instead of drugs. I've had patients have their children taken away from them when they came to see me with chronic ear infections who've been on antibiotics for over a year, didn't work, kept on having infections. I said, well, let's stop using the antibiotics. Let's deal with, well, why isn't the immune system working properly? Why are the ears being so susceptible to infection? And I got them to, okay, let's go on this pathway. And so many children, I'd say maybe 85% of kids with chronic ear infections, it's relatively simple. It only takes a few months of work and no more ear infections. They had their children taken away from them because they stopped giving them the antibiotics that weren't working. This medicine has been actively suppressed for the last 100 years.
Why? I don't understand. Why can't it be somebody's choice also, how they want to take care of their bodies?
I think it's all commercial. Now, clearly there's some well-meaning, and most doctors are well-meaning, and some of them believe that, well, this medicine is not valid. It's not scientific. Therefore, it's not good for my patients. And also I was taught in medical school that these things, alternative medicine is pretty weird stuff. We call it quackery, just to get rid of it. And by the way, I did get some nutrition education, 2 hours. And that 2 hours of nutrition education taught things like, well, multivitamins don't really help you, and vitamin D doesn't really help bone health. And it's more negative rather than positive. So they've been trained not to believe this. They care about their patients. So they're saying, okay, well, this is not working. Let's do these things that work. Ignoring the fact that the third leading cause of death in the United States is properly prescribed drugs. Okay? It's like, wait a minute. You're saying you're the best. How come we have so much disease? How come it's causing so much? How come so many people are being injured by it? Let's do something different.
Well, this claim that it's quackery, what does it take to become a natural medicine doctor? I mean, you started the first credited university.
Yes.
So is it just tiny little course, or is it many years? Like, what do people actually study in order to become natural medicine doctors?
Yes. So to be a naturopathic doctor, I founded Bastyr University in 1978. And in order to get into university, you first have to have pre-med. Okay. Then, just like conventional medicine, and then it's a 4-year program. The first 2 years are pretty much the same as conventional medicine. Anatomy, physiology, pathology, biochemistry, all those things. But the second 2 years are very different from conventional medicine. While we do teach disease diagnosis, we're more interested in diagnosis of where the body's not working properly. Not the end stage of this disease. It's like, where's the body functioning right now so you don't end up in the end stage disease? So we ask other questions that help us to understand what's going wrong in the body. And then the therapies we teach, of course, we teach basic drugs because sometimes you need an antibiotic, and I'm licensed to use antibiotics. But most of the time, you need to understand what's not going right. So how do you assess nutritional status? How do you assess toxic load? How do you assess people's sleep patterns, things like this? So we're all looking at how do you do the natural approach to healing? Use drugs when you have to, but all this work we can do to help make the body stronger, it's huge. And also, I want to go at the thing about not scientific. So way back in 1983, I got together with one of my brightest graduates, Dr. Michael Murray, and we said, and this at the point, I was doing a lot of work, political work, and I go to state legislatures, and they bring in the medical doctor. They say, wait, they're not scientific, not scientific. We're scientific medicine with a capital S. So we said, well, we think this natural medicine has something to offer. Is there science behind it? So we then started looking at the medical research. We found huge amount of research. So way back in 1985, we published the Textbook of Natural Medicine. It had over 5,000 references in the scientific literature showing that these natural therapies work. Nobody had ever compiled it before. So then we said, well, wait, now we're teaching the doctors. Now that textbook is now in its 5th edition. It's been translated into 4 languages, and it's sold 100,000 copies around the world. Okay?
To doctors.
To doctors.
Imagine the influence they have on their patients.
Use integrated medicine doctors, functional medicine doctors and such. Many of them have my textbooks. Okay. So then we realized we want to talk to consumers as well.
Yeah.
So then we wrote the Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine. And it was the first book that came out to consumers that showed the science behind natural medicine.
It's amazing how many years it took to make it into market. I mean, sometimes it's hard when you're the first to market and people are not ready.
Yes.
And as I said, I do believe that people are finally ready. One of the things that you talk about all the time, I know, has to do with the toxic soup that we're living in. Some of it feels like it's just out of our control. What can we do? Can you just help me wrap my head around the toxic soup that we're living in, and what can we actually even do about it?
That is such an important question, and I think everybody has to really take it seriously. So as I mentioned earlier, we suffer the highest burden of chronic disease in every age group ever. Why? What's happened? Our genetics didn't change. While our nutrition's not great, it didn't get that much worse. Well, actually, I'm going to modify that. Some parts of it got worse, but in general, most of it didn't get worse. What changed? Toxins. We have inundated the environment with metals and chemicals that poison our bodies. I like using diabetes as the example. When I was in primary care way back in 1975, I was so excited when I saw my first diabetic patient, about 6 months after I went to practice. Now, people might say, well, you're a young practitioner, it takes you a while to build your practice. I was fully booked within 3 months, because people are sick and I was able to help people. So I was so excited to see this diabetic patient. Now, diabetes affects 13% of the population, and it's projected that 1 out of 3 people have diabetes in their lifetime. What happened? So I was curious. I started looking at this. I started finding what researchers are now calling diabetogens in the environment. These are metals and chemicals that go into the body. They bind to the insulin receptor sites in the cells. So now the cells can't see insulin. So the body has to overproduce insulin to get the sugar into the cells. So we call that insulin resistance. Well, the insulin resistance is mostly due to environmental toxins covering up the insulin receptor sites. Not only that, but many of these toxins, like arsenic, for example, poison the pancreas so it can't produce enough insulin.
How are we getting arsenic into our bodies?
That's really scary. As near as I can tell from there's something called NHANES, which is the big national database that tracks people's nutritional status, toxic status, disease state, etc. So when you start looking at these environmental toxins, they are everywhere. And one of the worst is arsenic. And as near as I can tell, 1/3 of the population has arsenic levels high enough to increase the risk of disease. Diabetes, stroke, cancer. I mean, these are not rare conditions. These are very common. Where does it come from? Water, rice, and chicken are the 3 primary sources. Rice
and chicken.
And chicken. 3 primary
Why?
sources. Well, up until about 10 years ago, giving arsenical compounds to chickens was the standard of care. Okay, so they're always given arsenical compounds because it made them more resistant to disease and helped plump them up. Well, then we started finding all this research on the arsenic being a problem, so it's no longer the recommended or required form of taking care of chickens, but the chickens still have high levels of arsenic. So the question is, why hasn't that decreased?
Doctor, is this something that people should be testing for on a regular basis? I mean, do people get tested for all these heavy metals and toxins and arsenic? I don't know if my kids get tested for these things.
Well,
should
they but they should. Everybody should be tested for the body load of toxic chemicals, their body load of environmental metals. But there's another thing they should do. They should test their body for how much damage they're getting from these things. So there's 2 lab tests that are available. One's readily available. One's a little more difficult to get. The first one I really like talking about. It's an enzyme in the liver called GDTP. So in the past, and still currently, way we determine if a person has hepatitis, inflammation damage in the liver, is we look at the amount of liver enzymes that have been leaked into the blood. Up until a couple of decades ago, GDTP was one of the enzymes leaked from the liver into the blood that's indicative of inflammation in the liver. It's no longer being used because it wasn't as good as the other methods. And the reason it wasn't as good is because it was going up in the blood within the normal range in proportion to oxidative stress and in proportion to toxic load, the level of metals and chemicals in the body. So that it couldn't differentiate hepatitis from toxic exposure. So it turns out now that you can actually measure the person's GDTP and see that within the normal range, which is typically 10 to 50, as the level goes up, it correlates with diabetes, heart disease, dementia, all-cause mortality. Because what's happening is one of the key ways the body protects itself is with a molecule called glutathione. So glutathione binds to these toxins to help neutralize them. So when the body needs more glutathione, it increases GDTP in proportion to toxic load, and it recycles glutathione, so we keep on using it. So when I detoxify patients, one way I know I'm doing a good job is their GTT goes down. I say GTT and GDTP, different initials for the same test.
It's interesting that you bring up glutathione because there are a lot of supplements that people are taking, probably buying them mostly on Amazon, and glutathione is one of those. So people are buying them. I have this whole plethora of stuff here, but right here there is glutathione pill, for example, and there is this other one that people are taking in liquid form, glutathione. Does it make sense? Should we be taking glutathione as a supplement? Should we be giving it to our children? And do these things work?
So one of the best ways to protect ourselves from environmental toxins and to increase our energy levels and to improve longevity and decrease disease is increasing your glutathione levels. So the question then is, how do you increase glutathione levels? So I'm going to take a naturopathic approach. So when I teach my students, I say, first thing is, well, sure, we can increase glutathione levels, but first, look at why the person needs more glutathione. Okay? Decrease toxic load, decrease oxidative stress. Now, if we want to then increase their glutathione levels, while you can give people oral glutathione, it's a pretty expensive way of doing it because bacteria in the gut will break down the glutathione to cysteine. That cysteine is absorbed, and cysteine then goes to make glutathione. The rate-limiting step in the production of glutathione is the amount of cysteine that's available. So one way is glutathione, expensive way of doing it. A much less expensive way is to use N-acetylcysteine, or NAC for short. So NAC gets through the gut bacteria, gets in the body, and directly promotes glutathione production. Now, if you want to speed the process up, or if you have a patient who they have genetic reasons why they're not very good at producing glutathione, there are people like that too, you can give them either oral liposomal glutathione or give them topical liposomal glutathione, and that'll be absorbed into the body that way.
Does it smell bad as like sulfur? I mean, this thing smells like
sulfury.
My kids would say liquid fart.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are there natural ways to increase your glutathione?
Sure.
Is like the Brazil nuts or something like that?
Sure. So whey powder. So whey powder is very high in cysteine. It's also very good for muscle promotion.
And do you think that given the toxic soup that many of us who are living in the cities are exposed to, is it something we should first measure for, go to a doctor, and then take? Or should we just go ahead and take it because there's no risk in taking it? Like, how do we approach the type of supplements that we should take in order to fight against the toxins?
Yes. My preference is diagnose first, treat second.
Yeah.
So before I start something on something like this, I like to do some measurement to see, well, where are they really? So that way we can determine not only what they need, but were we effective at getting it back where it should be.
As I've been studying your work, doctor, one of the things that I keep thinking about is, I reference the toxic soup. And in some ways, it's like the environment that we're living in, whether it's the environmental stuff that you talk about, the food, it's the sewage that we're pouring into our bodies. And with a lot of these supplements, the idea is to throw a bunch of soap into the sewage to try to clean it up. Where your point is, well, how do we just put the guards on the sewage, right? And not let all the sewage go into our bodies. And so with regards to the environmental toxins, what can we actually do in our homes to protect ourselves and our children so that the sewage doesn't keep pouring in before we feel like we need to go and supplement everybody with, 20 pieces of supplements?
Yes. And again, thank you for saying that, because so many people, when I say, oh, it's natural, well, just take that. Well, sure. But step back and say, why do you need it? What are you doing that's making your body need some extra help? So you got to deal with causes first. So I say to people, okay, where are these toxins coming from? As near as I can tell, about 60% comes from food. So first thing you do is eat organic grown foods rather than chemically grown foods. Now that you're going to say, well, but that's more expensive. Yes, it is more expensive. But doctors even more expensive. Okay. And do you want your health or not? So eat organically grown foods. And it's not just that they're lower in environmental toxins, they're also higher in many of these nutrients that were not considered important, like carotenoids and flavonoids, things like that. When you grow foods chemically, the vitamin and minerals are fairly similar between organically grown and chemically grown. But when you start to look at the other things like flavonoids and carotenoids and such, 9% of them are lost when you grow foods chemically rather than organically. And those things have huge impacts on health. So it's not just avoiding the toxins. It's that as our bodies evolved, we expected these flavonoids and carotenoids and other molecules to be there to help make our physiology work properly. Well, when they're not there, our bodies don't work as well. So number one. Number two, last three kind of depends upon where a person lives, et cetera. So next thing is water. So as I said before, arsenic is a big issue. I would say about 20% of the public water supplies in the United States have arsenic levels known to induce disease. I'm talking about public water supplies. Now, we're looking at private wells. There's some private wells that have huge amounts of arsenic in it. So everybody should always have their arsenic levels tested. It's easy to do. There's a number of labs to do it. So we want to clean up the water supply. The third area is clean up the air. So if you're living in a city, and if you have forced air heating or cooling, you want to put in at least a MERV 12 filter to clean up the toxins in the air. For example, here we are in Los Angeles. There's lots of particulate matter. There's ozone, all these bad things. So put in a good filter in your house and run it 24/7. It's amazing. So we did it ourselves. One of the fun things about natural medicine is I learned something. We said, well, let's apply it to ourselves. So we started looking at this air pollution problem. And so we got a MERV 16 filter. That's about the best you can get. Put into our air filter. And we were so surprised. Number one is we have cleaners come in every 2 weeks to help us clean up the house. Okay. They said, what happened? What happened to your house? We said, what do you mean what happened to our house? He said, there's no dust anymore. Well, that's interesting. Okay.
Wow.
And then we had these fires up in British Columbia and the smoke came down to Seattle. Well, outside you smell the smoke. It's terrible. Inside our house, everything was pure and clean. So it was remarkable to us how much that improved the quality of our lives. And then the final one is health and beauty aids. So these lotions and potions we put on our skin, they are full of chemicals that can be really damaging to us. So I tell people, yeah, health and beauty aids are a good idea. But you'll get as much benefit from coconut oil as you get from these concoctions with all these chemicals that might make your skin look a little better, but they're going to give you diabetes. Okay. So clean ones.
Okay. So many questions about food, water, and beauty products, very specific ones that I have. Okay. So you talk about water. So here I have this water. This water is an alkaline water, and there are many of these brands. This is just one example. Alkaline water, is it worth investing in it? Is it actually better for your body?
First off, it's in a plastic bottle.
Yeah.
So you're putting microplastics into your body, you're putting phthalates into your body, and you're putting bisphenols into your body. Not a good idea. Okay. Now, in terms of the alkaline water, it's an intriguing idea. But everybody who's tried to sell that to me, I say to them, great, show me the research. Show me the clinical research that this actually helps people.
And?
I've never gotten an answer. And so anybody listening to this video that we're doing together, if you got research that shows that this helps people, please let me know, and I'll teach it to doctors who can then use it for their patients. Yeah. But until then, I don't have any reason to think it's good or bad.
So what do? You just get water and purify it in your house and then carry it in a glass vessel?
Well, I would like to do that. That is, I can get from home to here that way, which is what I did today. Huh. But after that, I try to get water that's in glass. So at least I'm not getting the plastics.
Okay, so onto the creams. So we have been told that we can get skin cancer if we don't wear sunblock every single day. And so if you send your kids to the beach, you got to lather everybody with sunblock. Otherwise, they're going to get burnt and skin cancer. And so I have a few products here, for example, you got a Coppertone, and there are many similar ones that you see all over the place. Is it more harm than good, these sunblocks?
So let me quote Dr. Michael Hollick. So he's one of the guys who've done a huge amount of research on vitamin D and has published a lot. And he made a statement that made the conventional medical community quite angry with them. He said that for every death we save from skin cancer by putting these lotions and potions on people's skin, we cause 55 cases of breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, and lung cancer. Because deficiency of vitamin D hugely promotes many kinds of cancer in the body. So by putting all these blocks on, we're decreasing people's vitamin D levels. I did a corporate wellness program in Canada where I measured the vitamin D levels on 4,500 oil field workers in Canada. 86% of them were deficient in vitamin D. Okay. So vitamin D deficiency is very common. In Seattle, it's gray a lot, okay? I measured 30 people in Seattle, their vitamin D levels, including myself. Not a single one had adequate levels of vitamin D. So one big problem with these things is it's blocking our ability to produce vitamin D. So it's hugely problematic. The second problem with these things is that they have chemicals in them that are damaging to the body. And they'll say, look at a chemical like parabens. They'll say, well, parabens have, and they're put in them so they're antimicrobial so bacteria don't grow in them, and fungi and such. So we'll say, well, it's antimicrobial, and the toxicity is really low, so the benefit's way better. But the problem is, toxicity is really low in that one chemical. Mm-hmm. Well, there's 13 different sunblockers they can put in that besides that one. Each has a little bit of toxicity. Then you start saying, well, the research says that this is not very toxic. But the problem is we're not only exposed to just one toxin, we're exposed to hundreds of actually, we're exposed to thousands of toxins, but we have good data on about 200 of them. And what we find is that, this toxin's not too bad, but when you add 5 toxins, we're starting to see some trouble. Now we add another 100 toxins. Wait a minute. We're starting to get more chronic disease. Now we got 1,000 toxins. So while each one may not be bad, altogether, what I call total toxic load, hugely problematic. Primary reason why we're having all this chronic disease.
So it just adds up.
It adds up.
So there are sunblocks that are not like these massive commercial ones, but they're the ones that have the minerals in it, let's say zinc, et cetera. Yeah. Do you recommend those? Because you still don't want to burn. I'm assuming that has to be bad for your skin.
So you don't want to burn, but you do want to get sun exposure. So first off, use clothing. Clothing is a really safe way of
But it's so hot.
So use clothing and air as well. But yeah, you're right. And then for your face, you want to stay pretty, or handsome, where the case may be. So using sunblocks on your face is a good idea. That's all I recommend. I'm just honest with you.
And what about supplements? Like, okay, so I have a couple of supplements here for vitamin D, like, this one is, there are a bunch of those. You mentioned that the glutathione is not so helpful in pill form sometimes, right. But what about vitamin D? Can you just buy a vitamin D off a shelf and rely on that?
Yes. Vitamin D is one of those nutrients that's very easily absorbed by the body. And so you don't need fancy forms. Now, if you want to get really sophisticated on it, it turns out sublingual vitamin D works a little bit better than oral vitamin D. So I recommend that people do sublingual.
Do you think in general sublingual is better than pill form?
Depends on what we're looking at. But for vitamin D, it clearly is better.
Okay. You talk about sublingual, makes me think about homeopathic medicine. Yes. So, I've been using a bunch of these for years. To be honest, I don't know what I'm doing, but I just buy them and read the label. And they do seem to work, doctor. So I don't know if it's a placebo. And, obviously I'm a passionate person with a creative brain, so maybe I'm imagining it. But it does seem to work. And I don't have that much information on it. What's your thought on homeopathic medicine, these little balls?
That is one of the most common questions I do get. If you look at the origins of homeopathy, it dates back to Hahnemann, a couple centuries ago. And he actually used what's called low potency homeopathy. That's typically 6 to 12x. I don't want to get into a lot of details of what it means, but that's what's called low potency homeopathy. That's where it came from, using low potency. Later on, people started using these high potency things like 30x and things like that. The clinical results of my own experience, it's way better with the low potency stuff because it seemed to work better with the body. So I used it a lot in pediatrics and things like that. I never found the high potencies particularly effective.
Are there specific illnesses or symptoms that you feel like homeopathy is more effective that you've actually experienced?
Oh, sure. Ear infections in kids.
Really?
Okay? To relieve the symptoms.
Wow.
Low potency homeopathy is very useful.
For inner ear or outer ear?
Oh, inner ear, yes.
For inner ear.
Yes.
So actually my son struggles with inner ear infections. I think it's partially because of the way everything is set up with his sinuses and his tube and all of that.
And it's structural.
The
Can't do anything about it.
Yes.
You got to use the drugs. 85% of kids with chronic infections that I've seen, we get rid of within a few months.
How?
Number one, they have to stop consuming dairy products.
Oh.
1/3 of kids with chronic ear infections, if you remove the dairy products, they stop having chronic ear infections. Well, why is that?
Why?
Well, you just got that little station tube that goes from the ear to the back of the throat. Well, if they're having an allergic reaction to the dairy products, that station tube swells. Now it can't drain the way it's supposed to, and they get infections. Seriously, 1/3 of kids. And that's published research, by the way. Okay, then the other things I do with them, I give them extra vitamin C, extra vitamin A, and extra zinc. Now, why am I doing that? Because those re-promote the functioning of the immune system. So what you see in these kids is they start, first thing you notice is, they're not getting colds as frequently, okay? Because what happens typically, kids get colds like every other time they get ear infection, okay? Now they stop having colds as often. Then they notice, and now even when they get a cold, now they're no longer getting the ear infections. So about 3 months, maybe as long as 6 months, no more ear infections. But what's important here, it's not only that they're no longer getting ear infections, but nutrients that their body needs, they're available now for resistance to things like cancer in the future. One of the best things you do to avoid cancer in the future, vitamin A, vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D, hugely preventive of later disease. So much of medicine focuses on this deal with the acute problem, let's relieve symptoms as much as we can, while ignoring why people are sick. That's why we naturopathic doctors, I think, are such an important resource for the community, because we help people understand why they're sick and how to get healthy.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, generally when my son suffered from ear infections, the recommendation was obviously an ear infection. They would give us antibiotics when it would get really bad. But just before that, they would recommend something like an antihistamine or a steroid spray.
Right.
And
why are they doing that?
Why?
To make the station tube not swell so much.
Right.
Well, why don't you go after the reason why the station tube is swelling? Because histamines aren't good for us. I mean, they have a place, but steroids, they're not good for us. They have a place, but only short term. So
you mentioned things like zinc, there's quercetin, there is C. So some of these, here's another example where you have a blend of multiple, looking for some of these multivitamin. Oh, here it is. So you mentioned the vitamin C, the D3, the zinc. And so there are these blends.
Yes.
And it's not a pill. It's actually in liquid form. Do you think there's a difference between the dry pill and a liquid form, or is it just preference?
It's a good question. In general, when I'm dealing with somebody with upper respiratory tract infection, I prefer the liquids. It seems to work a little better.
And what about things like garlic in the ear? I have this garlic oil.
Warm garlic oil in the ear is very relieving to kids with hot
it's
ear.
not witchcraft, because sometimes when I've asked doctors about garlic in the ear, they said, well, you can do it, but it's whatever.
So garlic is very interesting. Not only is it a warm oil in the ear will help relieve most symptoms, but garlic oil itself is full of antimicrobial agents. So it's actually very good. Not only in the ear, but topical infections. There's so many ways you can use garlic. But again, short term for acute. If it's happening regularly, garlic oil is not going to cure it.
Right.
It's just going to alleviate. You need to go after the cure.
Okay, let's talk about food. I love food. I recognize that food is so important. Everything about everybody's talking about our microbiome,
Yes.
right? And that engine. So what are foods that you absolutely love, that you'd love to walk into a family's kitchen and say, you're doing great, keep eating these things?
Yes. Okay. Age-old naturopathic adage, disease begins in the gut. The naturopaths have been saying that for 100 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So gut dysbiosis and such, huge issue. Most people have leaky gut because they got either the wrong bacteria in their gut or they're consuming things that damage the gut. So clean up the gut is one of the foundational things that we naturopathic doctors work on. Now, when you ask me about foods, and one of the most common questions I get is, well, what's the best diet? Ketogenic diet, vegan diet, pescatarian diet. And I say to people, I have studied every diet. Almost every diet. And I've actually tried almost every one of them too. Because before I recommend something to a patient, I'll say, okay, well, this is what the research says. Let me try it myself and see what it feels like. Because, it's better to treat people and help them understand what's going on. And I've come to a conclusion, which probably is not popular, but I'm now fairly convinced. It's not the type of diet a person's eating, it's the quality of the food that they're eating. Our bodies have remarkable adaptive ability. We can be on a ketogenic diet. We can be on a high meat eating diet. We can be on a vegan diet. As long as you eat foods properly within those areas, because when the vegan diet, there's some things you can't get from the food, you got to deal with that. Same thing with a high carnivore diet. Some things you can't get from a carnivore diet, you got to deal with those. But ultimately, it comes down to what's the quality of the food.
As whether it's organic and
is
whether
it organic?
it has
Is it full of
hormones?
nutrients, or is it nutrient depleted and full of toxins? There are many examples of foods that are grown now chemically where the levels of the toxins are now higher than the levels of the vitamins and minerals in them, vitamins that are necessary.
Are there foods that you think we should just absolutely stay away from, especially ones, given that we live in the United States, that you're more aware that are dangerous for us?
Okay, that's a long conversation. Okay. So let me put it simply. If it's not organically grown, and if it's highly processed, and highly processed or any level of processing, the degree to which it's processed, the degree to which it's problematic.
Mm-hmm. You have is it the Dirty Dozen foods? Can you describe those?
So that was a convenient tool created by the Environmental Working Group. They try to identify which foods have the highest levels of contaminant toxins and which foods have the least levels in terms of how they're grown conventionally. So some foods that just don't tend to pick up the toxins, okay? Whereas other foods really pick up a lot of toxins. Apples, strawberries, things like that, lots of toxins. But other things like squashes, things with thick skin, avocados and such, they don't tend to let much of the toxins in. So if you have limited resources, you can't buy everything organically grown, well, go to that Environmental Working Group and it'll show you which foods are relatively safe to eat that are conventionally grown, which ones never eat it unless you eat it organically.
I know that apples is an interesting thing because most European countries refuse to buy apples from the United States of America.
I don't blame them.
What's wrong with the American apples?
They're sprayed with all these toxins. They're I think typically number one or number two on the Environmental Working Group of the worst contaminated foods.
So no apple a day keeps the doctor away?
Until we started spraying them with pesticides, the answer is yes.
Wow.
But once you start spraying with pesticides, no. And then we start growing them in these huge groves where they use chemical fertilizers. So over time, the apples lose these other nutrients that are really important. I mean, things like they're flowered like called pterin. Okay, it's kind of a strange sounding term. So why is pterin important? Well, interestingly enough, it improves our ability to detoxify arsenic, and it protects our DNA from arsenic damage. And so apples rich in that keep the doctor away by protecting us from toxins like arsenic. Grow that food chemically, and not only does the pterin levels go down, but now you've got more toxins in it.
Doctor, how do you feel about things like Tylenol and Advil? We talked about the ear infections and the many other aches that we all have. And I think there's quite a bit of controversy on whether to give your child Tylenol or not give your child Tylenol. What are your thoughts on that?
For short-term use, we need drugs for various purposes. I don't have too much trouble with the short-term use. Long-term use, hugely problematic. I consider acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient, to be hugely problematic. And the reason for that is that it depletes glutathione in the body. So when you're taking Tylenol, you now depleted glutathione levels, which means those environmental toxins you're being exposed to can't protect yourself as much from them. Hugely problematic.
How do you feel about vaccines?
So one of the best ways to make sure naturopathic doctors don't get licensed is to be in opposition to vaccines. So my position on vaccines is those that are proven safe and effective, fine. But you look at COVID, it was never proven safe and effective before it was mass forced on everybody. So I don't like that at all. And I do like what Bobby Kennedy is doing of saying, fine, we can have vaccinations, but we got to prove they're safe first.
Are there any ones that worry you or any ones that you feel more confident about? I know this is a very tricky subject because doctors have been getting a lot of grief for saying anything about any one of the many 72 vaccinations that children are getting. But we as parents are just so lost because we are given this macro statement of, well, some of them need to be proven safe and some of them might need to be removed. In the meantime, we're raising our children and we don't know what to do, doctor.
Yeah, another complex challenge. That's 72. I remember 2 years ago looking at my grandson's vaccination card and seeing 72 on there. I was appalled. And I looked at his mother, and I said, is there any safety data on this? There's no safety data on this. Why are we doing this to the children? And now, I'm going to say something which maybe a lot of people in our natural medicine community won't be too happy about. While I talk about what's optimal and how we should be, the reality is that we have a really sick society. So many people's immune system working so poorly, probably more need for vaccinations now than ever before. But having said that, it's still a Band-Aid. It's not dealing with the cause why people are sick. Look at measles. The kids who get bad reactions to measles are primarily the ones who are vitamin A deficient. Vitamin A deficiency is incredibly common. Remember that corporate wellness program I did? I measured all the vitamin A levels, and it was 40% were deficient in vitamin A. Now, not as bad as vitamin D, but 40%, which means all those people who are low, they're way more susceptible to infections.
You mentioned Bobby Kennedy and the whole MAHA movement. What do you think we can expect of them? Do you think that they can make the change that we need to see? I mean, there are so many changes, right? The environment, the food, the Band-Aids that we're putting on things. What can we expect in the short term or even the long term from MAHA to do?
I'm so encouraged that these concepts that natural medicine has been promoting for so long are finally being adopted. And with many of these things, the short-term benefits may not be as obvious, but the long-term benefits will be huge. Again, most of the chronic disease is due to toxins. Let's clamp our food supply, clamp our water, clamp our air, stop poisoning our population.
You think that's something that's doable for them to be able to accomplish?
So I'm going to call this the 10% problem. So the difference between, this is kind of a rule of thumb, but the difference between producing a vitamin that's had the proper quality control versus one that's just being sold, about 10%. The difference between producing a product that is clean versus a product that is contaminated, about 10%. Well, that 10% is pure profit. So what we need to do is say, wait a minute, it's okay for us to require of our products that they not be toxic. And we're willing to pay a little bit more for it so that we don't have to go spend all our money on the doctors. I mean, we now spend $1 out of every $6 in our GDP on healthcare. I mean, it's incredible what we're spending on healthcare. Well, let's stop poisoning people and don't spend so much money on healthcare.
Is it true that the poison in the food actually impacts the child's IQ?
There are 3 studies that I can quote off the top of my head right now, where they looked at the levels of organophosphates in the pregnant women. They then compared the IQ of the children born to women in the top 10% of organophosphate levels versus those in the bottom 10%, and ironed out all the socioeconomic differences. For all these kids for 7 years, all 3 studies found exactly the same thing. A 7-point drop in IQ, the kids born to the women in the highest level of organophosphate pesticides.
That's a massive number.
Huge. And that's just one toxin. Then you add lead, and there's so many others to consider. We are basically destroying the brains of our children. Why do we have so much ADHD and autism and, children have unable to graduate from grammar school or high school, being able to read and things like this? Well, we can throw rocks at the educational system, and there's reason to do that. The problem is their brains are so damaged. It is so scary. Personal story. So our son, we have a son, very bright kid, as you would expect. His mom and his dad are very smart. So it was time for him to go to school and to grammar school. We took him to the various grammar schools. And what we found was that when we went there for first grade, first off, I looked at the children, and you can see the children, the level of vitality was very low. Then we said, well, he's already reading before first grade. So how are you going to deal with this? They said, oh, well, we'll put him in the corner so he can read by himself while we teach the other people. It's like we've wrecked our society. We've just wrecked it.
Mm. How much of health is genetic, in your opinion?
15%.
50.
15.
One five. Only 15% is genetic?
Only 15% of disease is genetic. I'm not pulling that number out of the air. There's a huge number of studies that show that. It's only 15%. So many people think, I'm sick because my parents were sick. Well, you may have had an increased susceptibility, but it's not predetermined. I use my wife as an example. Every woman in her family died from complications of osteoporosis. Typical thing would be like my mother-in-law, I should say, was talking to a friend, and her friend had a dog, and the dog went around her, wrapped up her legs. She fell over, hit the ground, broke her hip. Mm. She shouldn't have broken her hip, but she broke her hip because she had osteoporosis. So it turns out all the women in her family had a genetic susceptibility because of the inability to absorb vitamin D adequately. Okay. So then my wife, whom we thought, living a really healthy diet, taking what we thought was appropriate amounts of vitamin D, we found that she had osteopenia in her mid-40s. We were so surprised. So then we started looking at what's going on here. By the way, I was embarrassed. Here I am, this world-class expert in natural medicine. My wife has osteopenia, going right into osteoporosis like her mother and her aunts and such. And so I started using all natural therapies I knew of, and her bone density kept going down and down and down. So then we had the opportunity to do one of the first genetic tests available for nutritional status. We found that there's something called the vitamin D receptor sites, and they have genetics that determine how well they work. Well, there's 6 variants that result in the receptor sites not working very well at all. My wife had all of them. So then we realized, well, wait a minute. The normal amounts of vitamin D are not enough for her. So then we started increasing her vitamin D. We had to give her 12,000 units of vitamin D a day for 2 years in order to get enough vitamin D into her body. You were DEXA down. Oh, vitamin D receptor site problem, flattened out. And now she's recalcified her bones she has more calcium in her bones now than when she was in her 40s.
Could somebody take too much vitamin D and actually harm themselves?
It is possible, but it's hard to do. Okay.
So you were okay with constantly increasing until her levels were right?
We were measuring her vitamin D levels. And by the way, people ask me what's the optimal amount of vitamin D, and I'll say the only way to be sure is to measure. So I did a study. I looked at, I'm not exaggerating here, I looked at over 1,000 studies of vitamin D to try to answer the question, what's the optimal amount of vitamin D to give to people? And it turns out it's 4,500 units. But that's the average. Some people, 800 units with just enough. Other people, 10,000 units were required. But you look at the data, and it's about 4,500 units. Now, unless the person has brown skin, then it's about 4,000 units. If they have black skin, it's about 3,500 units. Because black people utilize vitamin D more efficiently than white people do, probably because they have dark skin, which makes it harder for them to get vitamin D from the sun.
What can we do in order to have more access to this kind of information? I find it to be incredibly difficult to absorb so much of the information. There are so many different details. Everything depends on an underlying cause. There are not a lot of doctors like you. Many doctors like you are not practicing in states like California. Do you think that technology and AI could possibly bring to the market more access to natural medicine?
Yes. So actually, I've been working on a health AI for several years now, and we will be releasing it in hopefully in September. And basically, we help people understand where the body's not working right, okay, and why it's not working right, and what to do about it. So artificial intelligence is a great tool, and I'm very, very deep into it right now.
Especially with measuring, right? The key to everything is to be able to have that autonomy to measure your body and understand what it is that you're reading about your body.
Yes. So I believe very strongly each person is their own best doctor. But we have to educate people to better understand their bodies. About 75 years ago, conventional medicine, it's a little longer than that now, but let's say 75 years ago, it's a good number. Conventional medicine started disassociating people from their personal responsibility for their health. They started telling people, depend upon doctors. And then the neighborhood healers, the wise women in the neighborhood, we now call them old wives' tales to discredit it, ignoring the fact they existed in this community for such long periods of time because it worked. Well, they wanted to remove the community's ability and individuals' ability to take care of their health to make them depend on doctors instead.
Yes. Well, now this is the era of self-responsibility and autonomy now, and I think many people are waking up.
About time.
So if there's something that we want to do, just as civilians, as citizens, what would you say without getting overwhelmed? Because there's a lot to do.
Yes.
What could be, the first and second steps that we can take this weekend to just clean our bodies and our families' bodies?
Go to your refrigerator, throw away everything that's in plastic. Now, if you can't afford that, don't replace it with something that's in plastic, number one. Number two, go to your kitchen, remove the Teflon, remove the plastic containers, use glass instead, or use, there's some interesting ceramic cooking pans, way, way less toxic. So just start by just removing your toxic experience. Then now let's start adding in the organically grown food, okay, and all the other things I talked about.
It is possible that for the first time, maybe in your lifetime, there's actual leadership in America that is listening to people like you.
Yes.
So what would you like to say to them, given that they're probably listening? What can they do for America?
Well, I chatted with Bobby Kennedy about this 30 years ago when I was still president of Baxter University. He's doing exactly what I wanted him to do. So, I mean, I'm not exact, but almost everything he's doing is right on. And you hear what he talks about. And some people get so upset about it. I look at, finally, somebody's saying something about it.
Good. Well, I love ending on this optimistic message. And it's nice to know that there's something that we ourselves can do to take care of our health. And I think ultimately that's what natural medicine is about.
Yes.
So thank you, doctor. You're a legend. I'm sure people are going to enjoy learning more from you. How can people follow you if they want to get some more details? Are you on social media? Or are you still, coming out with new podcasts?
So I've devoted my career to teaching doctors. So I don't have a lot of easily accessible consumer things. Now, having said that, I have authored or co-authored 12 books at this point. So here's what I recommend right there.
Right. And this is available on Audible.
Yes.
So people can go on a walk in the sun and listen to you.
I want to talk about, there you go. I want to talk about this a bit. Read the book, but do it. Yeah. Too many people read the book. What a great book. And I ask them, so did you do it? They say, well, I will. No, do it. Because what I teach people here is the primary reason people are sick is because of toxins. Let's get rid of them. But don't go on a detox program until your body's ready. See, yes, you have to avoid toxins, but then you have to get what's in the body out. Make sure your gut's working properly. Make sure your liver's working properly. Make sure your kidneys are working properly, because that's how we're going to get rid of the toxins. So don't stir things up until your body can get rid of it.
Yeah. I love this about you. You walk the walk. You really mean it. Yes. You want people to actually improve their lives, and I appreciate that about you.
I'll go any further. So the first 2 weeks, I teach people really carefully how to avoid toxins. And we look at the toxins, there's kind of two categories. We think metals and chemicals, but there's a more clinically relevant way. Persistent versus non-persistent. So non-persistent means that it's a chemical or like arsenic where we were exposed to it as we evolved as a species. We're pretty good at getting rid of it. Half-life in the body is hours to days. It takes about 4 half-life to get rid of something. So just stop the exposure, get better. So the first 2 weeks, I show people how to avoid those non-persistent toxins. And within 2 weeks, people will actually notice feeling better, which then means they're going to be ready to go after the persistent toxins. So these are typically man-made chemicals that were designed to be difficult to break down by biological systems. That's why they have half-lives measured in months to years to decades.
Wow.
PCBs. I mentioned that in rheumatoid arthritis. Half-life of PCBs is 10 years. So every time you go and eat farmed fish, you're putting PCBs in your body, which may be with you for the rest of your life. But here's something actually optimistic. Half the people in my birth cohort, the year I was born, are dead now. Most of the rest are full of disease. I'm not. My wife's not. My colleagues who practice natural medicine, they're not full of disease. We have tremendous ability to be healthy. I don't care where a person is right now. I don't care what disease they have. Right now, you can make differences in your life that you can experience benefit from within a week, within 2 weeks.
So let's say your father or your grandfather, did they practice the same way of life and that they live as long as you, God willing, are going to live?
Oh, I wish I had my computer with me. I'll show you a slide. So, and when I'm giving a lecture on neurological health, how to avoid environmental toxins, I have a picture of my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and me as a little kid about 7 years old. I said, okay, well, here we have these 4 generations. What happened? My great-grandfather lived the Mediterranean lifestyle, grow a lot of his own food, and it was before there was much toxicity. Lived at age 95, never saw a doctor in his life, had no apparent disease. My grandfather, half the American lifestyle, half the healthy Italian lifestyle that he grew up with. He also made it to 95, but he had a fair amount of chronic disease. Okay, and he ended up having to have, where my great-grandfather lived independently until he decided he was done with life. My grandfather needed 20 years of assisted living. My dad, whom I love dearly, standard American diet, smoked, stopped smoking, smart, strong-willed, but then stopped smoking. My dad died at 88. Rheumatoid arthritis, heart disease, osteoarthritis, dementia, all these degenerative diseases, because even though he had similar genetics to his parents and his grandfather, he wrecked everything by basically putting in poisons and not having the nutrients that he needed. So I want to be like my great-grandfather, okay, not like my father.
Wow. I guess that's some data for you.
Yes. In my own family, it was really clear.
Amazing. Well, Dr. Pizzorno, thank you for being a legend, and thank you for fighting for us. I know it has not been easy, but this has been your moment. This is your moment, and we're really grateful that we have some brave people out there who truly, truly care about our health. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks for all you do to promote health. It's just really remarkable.